March 30th, 1998. Florida State Prison in Stark. It was still dark outside when activity began quietly building behind the prison walls. At approximately 5 o'clock in the morning, officials were preparing for Florida's third execution of the year. The electric chair had been inspected and prepared the night before. Staff members knew their assignments. The witness room would soon begin to fill. And just a short distance away, in a small death watch cell, 54-year-old Judy Buenoano was living through the final hours of her life. Her Achilles had run their course. Judy had requested steamed broccoli, asparagus, fresh strawberries, and hot tea. But according to reports, she barely touched the food. Instead, much of her remaining time was spent with her Catholic spiritual advisor. They prayed together, and they waited. Those who encountered Judy during those final hours described a woman who appeared frightened and emotionally exhausted. Whatever confidence she may have displayed over the years seemed to be fading as the clock moved closer to 7. Judy knew exactly what was waiting for her down the hallway: Florida's electric chair. The chair inmates had come to know by another name: Old Sparky. It was time to begin the final preparations. She was escorted from Death Watch and taken to another area, where she showered. Her hair was then shaved from part of her head. It was part of the procedure. The head electrode used with Florida's electric chair required direct contact with the skin. An area of Judy's leg was prepared for the second electrode as well. When the process was finished, Judy was given clean clothing: a white shirt and dark pants, with part of one pant leg altered to accommodate the equipment that would later be attached to her calf. Then she was returned to her cell, and once again, she waited. Her spiritual advisor remained with her for part of this time, attempting to provide whatever comfort was still possible. There was very little left to say. The courts had spoken. The paperwork had been completed. Outside the cell, the prison continued operating according to procedure. And at approximately 6:55 that morning, the waiting finally ended. Inside the chamber stood the heavy wooden electric chair. Officers guided Judy toward it and helped position her in the seat. Leather restraints were secured around her body, her wrists, her legs, her torso. The electrodes were positioned, and as officers worked around her, adjusting straps and preparing the equipment, it is impossible to know precisely what Judy was thinking. But there was one moment from her past that had changed everything. A moment when the secrets Judy had spent years hiding. We need to go back to July of 1983. John headed toward his car. He climbed inside and turned the ignition. Seconds later, the vehicle erupted. The blast tore through the car. Judy emerged to find the wreckage of John's vehicle and emergency crews scrambling to save him. Against the odds, John survived. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. And suddenly, investigators had a very serious question. Why had John Gentry's car exploded? Initially, detectives considered several possibilities. Could someone connected to John's business have wanted to frighten him? Was this retaliation? But as investigators started looking deeper into John's life, their attention slowly shifted toward the woman closest to him: Judy. And once detectives began examining Judy Buenoano's past, they found something they could not ignore.
If you're drawn to dark true crime and unforgettable stories, explore the complete collection at deathhousefilms.com or subscribe and like now.
Long before she became Judy Buenoano, she was Anna Lou Welty. She was born on April 4th, 1943, in Texas. Her childhood was deeply troubled. Her mother died when Anna was only 4 years old, after which she spent time living with her grandparents. Accounts of Judy's childhood describe an unstable and difficult home. She later claims she suffered mistreatment and deprivation there. By adolescence, her behavior had become increasingly rebellious. At 14, following a confrontation with her stepmother, she spent time in custody before eventually entering reform school. She graduated in 1960. And for a while, it appeared the instability of her childhood might remain exactly where it belonged, in the past. She became a mother. She worked in nursing. She married. And eventually she found herself living what appeared to be a fairly ordinary life in Florida. But appearances can be deceptive, because inside Judy's first marriage, something was beginning to go very wrong. Judy married James Goodyear, an Air Force sergeant. Together, they appeared to be building a family. But after James returned from service in Vietnam, the marriage reportedly became increasingly difficult. Then James began getting sick. Not just once, again and again. His health deteriorated. He spent time in and out of medical facilities, including Veterans Administration hospitals. Doctors struggled to determine exactly what was happening. Then, in 1971, James Goodyear's life came to an end. At the time, there was little reason for anyone to imagine that something more sinister might have occurred. Judy collected life insurance benefits following his passing, reportedly tens of thousands of dollars. For a newly widowed woman, it provided financial security. But years later, after investigators began looking back at James Goodyear's unexplained illness, they would see his story very differently. And James would not be the only one. His name was Bobby Joe Morris, and before long, he began getting sick too. After leaving Florida, Judy eventually moved to Colorado, where she became involved with Bobby Joe Morris. The two lived together. Once again, Judy appeared to have found stability, a new relationship, a new home, a new beginning. But according to prosecutors, the same pattern soon began repeating itself. Bobby became mysteriously ill. His condition deteriorated, and once again, doctors struggled to explain why. Years later, investigators would allege that Bobby had been exposed to a toxic substance over time. But at the time, nobody connected his illness to Judy. Why would they? She was his partner, the person caring for him, the person standing beside him as his health failed. Eventually, Bobby Joe Morris passed away. And once again, Judy received insurance money. Another relationship had ended. Another insurance policy had paid. And Judy moved forward. If the allegations were true, something disturbing was becoming clear. By the beginning of the 1980s, Judy had relocated her family to Gulf Breeze, Florida. And from the outside, she appeared to be doing very well. She purchased a home. She drove a white Corvette. She opened a beauty salon. Michael began suffering symptoms that doctors initially struggled to explain. His condition became increasingly serious. But investigators would later reach a horrifying conclusion. They believed Michael's condition had not happened naturally. They alleged that Judy herself had contributed to his illness. He experienced paralysis and required leg braces and assistance getting around. For Judy, this meant assuming the role of caregiver yet again. And then in May of 1980, Judy arranged a family canoe trip. On the surface, it sounded harmless. A day on the water, a family outing. But Michael's physical limitations created an obvious danger. If something happened to the canoe, he would have difficulty saving himself. During the outing, the canoe overturned. Everyone went into the water. Judy survived. Another son survived. Michael did not. To authorities at the time, it appeared to be a tragic accident. A young man with serious physical disabilities had fallen into the water and had been unable to escape. Judy once again appeared to be the grieving family member left behind. And once again, insurance money followed. For years, that might have been the end of Michael's story. But then Judy met John Gentry, and the pattern began one more time. John Gentry was successful. He owned a business. He and Judy developed a relationship, and eventually they began building a life together. From John's perspective, things appeared promising. But investigators would later claim that Judy was already thinking several moves ahead. Insurance became part of the picture. According to accounts of the case, John believed there was a policy worth approximately $100,000. But investigators later alleged that Judy had arranged significantly greater coverage without John fully understanding what had been done. Then came the vitamins. Judy began giving John capsules that she said were good for his health. John trusted her. Why wouldn't he? He swallowed them. And then, he began getting sick. His symptoms became serious enough that he sought medical help. Doctors struggled to determine what was causing the problem. But eventually, John noticed something. When he stopped taking the capsules Judy had been giving him, he began feeling better. That was a problem for Judy. And so prosecutors believe Judy chose something much more dramatic, something that couldn't easily be mistaken for a lingering illness. John's car. And in July of 1983, when John turned that ignition, Judy's carefully constructed life began to unravel. Detectives examined the wreckage. They interviewed John. They interviewed Judy. And slowly, investigators began looking beyond the explosion itself. Who benefited if John was gone? Were there insurance policies? Had John recently been sick? What medications had he been taking? And who had been giving them to him? Then came the bigger question. Had anything like this happened around Judy before? Eventually, officers arrived at Judy's beauty salon. The successful business owner was placed under arrest. For Judy, it was humiliating. Customers and acquaintances could see what was happening. The image she had built, the businesswoman, the mother, the respectable member of the community, was collapsing in public. She was taken in for questioning, but Judy denied responsibility. She fought the accusations. She maintained that investigators were wrong. Judy would have to face the ultimate consequences. By 1984, Judy Buenoano was facing the fight of her life. Her attorneys challenged the state's case. Judy herself took the witness stand. She became emotional. She cried. She insisted that the prosecution's version of events was wrong. The defense attempted to create doubt. After all, many of the incidents being discussed had happened years earlier. People became sick. Accidents happened. Families experienced tragedy. Could prosecutors really prove that all of these events were connected? That was the question the jury had to answer. The courtroom became a media spectacle. Reporters followed the case closely. To some observers, Judy appeared to be an ordinary middle-aged woman being accused of extraordinary things. And that contrast made the story irresistible. But prosecutors presented something more powerful than any single allegation. They presented a pattern. Insurance. Loss. Money. Again and again. And eventually, the juries were convinced. Judy was convicted in connection with Michael's death and received a life sentence. But the case involving James Goodyear carried an even greater consequence. Judy Buenoano was sentenced to death. The woman who had once lived comfortably in Gulf Breeze, driving a Corvette and running her own salon, was now headed to Florida's death row. And there she would remain for years, waiting for the final day to be determined. Death row did not erase Judy's personality. If anything, she began building another identity inside prison. She spent time crocheting and knitting. She made clothing and blankets. She read. She became increasingly religious and eventually converted to Catholicism. She also developed relationships with other women inside the prison. Some accounts describe her as someone who attempted to help other inmates and became an established figure within the small world around her. Dates came and went. Lawyers continued fighting, and Judy waited. At various points, she reportedly made comments suggesting that she would rather face the electric chair than spend the remainder of her natural life inside prison. And by March of 1998, there was nowhere else for Judy's case to go. Back inside the execution chamber, officers continued securing Judy into the chair. It was just after 7 o'clock in the morning. Behind the glass, witnesses watched. For more than a decade, Judy had lived with the possibility of this morning. Now it had arrived. There would be no courtroom testimony, no lawyers making arguments, no jury to persuade. The straps were checked. The electrodes were prepared. Judy sat quietly. She appeared frightened. When she was given an opportunity to make a final statement, Judy declined. No long speech, no declaration of innocence, no dramatic final message, just a simple refusal. After everything that had been said about Judy Buenoano, her final public statement was essentially silence. At approximately 7:05 a.m., the execution procedure began. Witnesses watched from behind the glass as the state carried out the sentence imposed years earlier. At approximately 7:13 that morning, Judy Buenoano was pronounced dead. She was 54 years old. The story of Judy Buenoano remains disturbing because there was never one single moment that defined it. A husband becomes mysteriously ill. Insurance money follows. Another partner becomes sick. Another payment follows. A son develops an unexplained medical condition. A family outing ends in tragedy. Then another boyfriend begins getting sick, until his car suddenly explodes. Judy Buenoano remains one of the most infamous women in Florida's true crime history. A case built on money, deception, unexplained illness, and a trail of tragedies that investigators eventually realized had one person at their center. And perhaps the most haunting part of the entire story is this. It wasn't the first mysterious illness that exposed Judy. It wasn't the first insurance payment. It wasn't even the death of someone in her own family. It was one man surviving something he was never expected to survive. One turn of a key, one explosion, and one investigation that finally forced detectives to ask the question no one had seriously asked before. Who exactly was Judy Buenoano? And once they began searching for that answer, everything changed.